Welcome to Straight Shot Politics. Each episode will bring you in-depth discussion with experts, community leaders, and analysts who will share their insights, experiences, and predictions. From local elections to global diplomacy, we'll provide you with the tools and perspectives you'll need to navigate today's real-world landscape.
Hello, hello. Welcome to Straight Shot Politics. I'm Lisa Chafee, and joining me today is my partner in crime, Michael Nash.
Hello, hello.
And we're excited today. We're going to get a little education about what's happening in the Middle East. We've been hearing for many years now the wars, the tensions, and everything that's happening in the Middle East. And I personally have never had a great understanding of it. So in order to help me and others like yourselves have a better understanding of what's happening in the Middle East, joining us today is Abdullah Barsa, who is candidate for City Council in Groveport, and Besa Sharrah, who is Director of External Affairs for Central Ohio with the Attorney General's Office. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for coming out today. Thank you.
So, Abdullah, let's start with you. You're a candidate now for Groveport, but tell us your story on how you came to the United States. I believe you said you're from Pakistan. So tell us about what was life like there and what brought you here.
So I was 3 years old when I first came to U.S. and my dad brought me here and we immigrated from Pakistan. We used to live in Islamabad in Pakistan. And I lived here for a few years, but during my school, I went back and I did some education there too, like I did my high school from Pakistan in Islamabad. And after high school, I came here permanently and I did my college here, and then I've been living here since 2010.
So give us a little day in the life of what it was like for you in Pakistan.
It was beautiful. I really enjoyed my time there, and I feel blessed to be here in this country as well. Pakistan has been a home because I was born there and I have family members over there. But overall, in the city where we used to live, in capital in Islamabad, that was a great experience and we had a good education over there.
Culturally, what is it like?
Culturally is in Islamabad, it's very westernized. Besa was there too earlier this year, and in Islamabad, you don't feel like it's like not part of Pakistan. It's very open. So
it is an Islamic nation, is that correct?
It is, yes, it is an Islamic nation.
And the government, is that a monarchy or is it by election a democracy?
It is by democracy. There is a parliament.
Okay.
And, yeah.
And what's it like with the surrounding countries that, there's a lot of tensions going on, a lot of it, like we've seen in Iran, it's the battles between the Shiites and the Sunnis. How does that affect Pakistan?
Obviously, if there's a war going on in your neighboring country, it affects everybody in the neighbors. So it did affect Pakistan too when there was war going on. While I was growing up, there was war going on in Afghanistan. And now there's also tensions going on with Iran. So it do affect the neighboring countries, and people like Pakistan had over 5 million refugees from Afghanistan in Pakistan.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So that was a lot of burden on a country which is not very established and not very rich like Pakistan. So it did affect with crime and stuff. And there are a lot of people now there are second generation Afghans living in Pakistan. So,
wow.
Yeah. So it puts a lot of burden on smaller country.
I'm also a little familiar too with the relationship between Pakistan and India. Is that something that, I hear that there's some negativity going on, but is that something that is a normal thing, or is that just stuff we hear?
I think it's just between the governments, people, individuals, they don't have anything against each other.
So it's like no like animosity or like I'm sure there's probably some immigration or some visiting or some tourism right back and forth.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, good. Okay.
So, Besa, you have a lot of knowledge about affairs of the Middle East. Well, you're so smart anyway about many things. And I was doing some research, and I didn't even realize this, is that it wasn't until really after World War II when many of the states the lines were drawn with the creation of Israel becoming a state. Iran at that time was considered one of the most Western countries in the Middle East. It was ran by almost a monarchy. I can't pronounce the name, so I'm not even going to try to, of the leader that was there before the Ayatollah took over.
The Shah of Pakistan.
Yeah. Iran, I'm sorry.
Oh, Iran. I'm sorry. That's what I meant. The Shah
first,
of Iran.
Why do you think it's important? And I'll tell you why I think, but I want to hear what your opinion is on why we as Americans should understand what's happening over there, because, our tax dollars are going over there. We potentially could be threatened, but why do you think?
Well, the evolution of Iran, it's kind of, I just feel like we haven't studied it enough, and we as Americans have not paid enough attention to the old Iran to understand how we got where we got, right? So the frustration at the time with the Shah was that, and why the people rebelled was because they felt like he was essentially stealing from the people. And there was an uprising. Then we later discovered that the uprising was actually pushed a little bit by the West because he was holding on to petrol, right? And he was making sure that the reserves were now to go to the people of Iran and or to be sold for monetary value at much, much higher than what originally the agreement was for with England and the United States. And so that frustration was in part infused by the West as a competitor to not have this person raise the price of gas of today. And then eventually, of course, as you know, the Shah then was brought here. He was exiled, and then the Ayatollah took over. But just to give you a perspective of what we thought had happened and then what we actually discovered happened. So that's part of how the Ayatollah came into power, was they took advantage of this vulnerability between the government and the people who didn't know any better, and they established their regime. That regime, as you know, is what we know today, right?
Which came into existence in 1979.
Yeah, so if you look at pictures, it's actually very special because you'll see women in miniskirts and with the ability to study and do everything the same as their male colleagues could do. And then after the Ayatollah established the regime, of course, there's opportunities for women to go to school. And actually, people might not know this, but Iran has one of the most educated youth in the world. And that is pretty incredible. So they're very educated. Everybody's got, if not a master's level, at least a bachelor's degree. And they're having to sponsor their own economy. And that's a different question. Maybe you'll ask that later. Because of the sanctions by the United States. So that's kind of the history of how we got to the Iran of today that we know. So, and
under the current leader, who's been there since 1979, they've taken us. It seems like they've taken a step backwards as far as women's rights go.
Significant. Yes.
Women are treated as dogs, less than dogs. They're not allowed to do anything.
No.
It's all, and they call the United States the Great Satan, and Israel the Little Satan. And that's what we hear now. All we hear about is, how is it affecting Israel? And a lot of Americans say, I don't care. That's over there. So on the grand scheme of things, how does this affect us?
So it's kind of interesting because for as long as as you know, I'm Albanian American, and for as long as I've been in the United States, we've been trying really hard to figure out the Iran problem. And the reason for that is because anytime we engage with this country, the biggest thing is that it throws off the balance with Israel. And so let me just stop real quick there to kind of explain why that is.
Please.
So part of the reason why the Iran of today exists is it's the most sanctioned country in the world next to Russia. And what that means is essentially the United States will sanction anybody and any enterprise that does any sort of business of any kind with Iran. So they have an economy that functions solely on internal micro and macro economy. So bartering is a really big part of the economy, self-financing. So they have their own banks. And because of how limited they are in their options, they've had to form alliances with a lot of enemies of the United States.
Like Syria?
One such is, of course, Syria, but also Russia, right? We have a hostile relationship with Russia. And what that has created is a bridge of communication and or agreements that we don't have details of with Iran and Russia together, and by default, probably China as well. Again, we don't know of anything where we have seen what the agreement looks like. So that's how Iran has turned into Iran. So by default, the enemies of, Iran have become the enemies of Russia. The enemies of Russia have become the enemies of Iran and all these other countries, right? Because they have to kind of run together. Those are the alignments. Specific to Israel, their big thing is the way they attack Israel. And it's by ballistic missiles, right? And so they can penetrate the dome. They can do a lot of things that a normal missile cannot do. And so they are deadly to Israel. So when President Obama came along and he really, really, really tried hard to solve through diplomacy a very non-diplomatic war, one of the things that they did was to put this agreement on paper, right? So, and the agreement was Germany, the United States, France, and a couple more countries. They decided that the best way to neutralize Iran was to create this goodwill agreement of you're going to stop developing nuclear warheads, and in return, we are going to defreeze, and I say defreeze, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, all the assets that we have frozen over the years, especially in the 70s, from you. And it came down to, I believe, $130 billion.
Wow.
That had been frozen since the Shah was in power in the 70s, right? So when the media was talking back then about all these funds that were there, that we gave them taxpayer money. In essence, if you really look, down the rabbit hole, it was their money. It was their money all along. Now, was it really their money? Because we had seized it, so it's now our money, right? So we can go back and forth on that. But those are the funds that were given to Iran, and they were not handed over 130 billion. It was installments, and each installment was given after an inspection that was allowed only to happen by I forgot the name of the organization, but it's essentially an organization that works specifically on nuclear warhead inspection. And it was a council that was formed as part of this initiative. So that was the agreement. What the agreement did not include was ballistic missiles, right? So they spoke a lot about nuclear warheads. They spoke a lot about the facilities where, we are going to remove all abilities of Iran to be able to develop nuclear power of any kind. But they left out one of the biggest weapons with which we kill Israelis every day. They killed Israelis every day. Mm-hmm. And so in that aspect, that agreement was very, very crippled because while it was a goodwill agreement, it did not address one of the biggest issues that our allies, Israel, faces. So that was part of the reason why, if you look back, a lot of the, obviously back then the conservatives were very much against it because it wasn't a good agreement. It essentially gave money to Iran on a handshake deal on the hopes that they will let our physicists, our nuclear physicists, to inspect and take pictures that they were, in fact, not developing nuclear power warheads.
Okay.
When we started putting that agreement in place and the inspection started, there was only a couple that happened. And then they stopped because the Iranian government would not allow the inspectors to go in, or they would come up with reasons why they couldn't go in on the timetable that had been pushed in. So then the Trump administration, when they came into power, they just essentially said, no way, this is a terrible agreement, we're walking. And they did. Also a mistake. Because what that did was it ended any sort of dialogue with a very hostile country to the United States. Mm-hmm. And that's not smart because when the diplomatic dialogue ends, we know what begins. Violence begins, right? And yes, Iran did not bomb the United States, but they hurt our allies, right? And so that's why we are where we are. So just to kind of bring you back to that journey of today. And
to help our listeners understand a little bit, as I'm doing research and I've got it pulled up here on the web, that the whole thing between Iran and Israel is, from what I'm understanding, Iran refuses to recognize Israel as a legitimate state. They were given statehood in 1948 as part of the
correct
post-World War II. And in that process, over 700,000 Palestinians were removed from Israel. Now, I don't know if Israel said get out or they chose to leave. But Iran also blames the Jews, Israel, for putting out anti-Islamic propaganda and hatred. Therefore, you hate us, we hate you. I'm trying to dumbify it down, if you will. And that's why, and Israel is our ally, our strongest ally in the Middle East. And also I was reading that when Israel was in the process of negotiations with Saudi Arabia, that Iran did not like that. And so they created things, they started attacking to stop that unity from happening. So it's very frustrating. It's so, I mean, the battles in the Middle East, the history of it goes back centuries, most of it based on religious stuff. But now we have October 7th, and we've got Hamas, which is the Palestinian terror group, working hand in hand with the Iranian terror group, Hezbollah. What do we need to do? Is there anything that the United States, the other great powers, can do to help bring peace?
So it's hard because those groups originally were created as freedom fighters, trying to save innocent people from certain death. Right. I remember I graduated my master's in Switzerland, and my school had a lot of people from all nations, Afghanis, you name it. And I had a friend of mine, he was originally from Lebanon, and his big thing was Hezbollah was formed as a way to protect the Lebanese from all the bombing that was happening in 1989, right? And so the big thing is the mission was always to save innocent lives. And then these groups end up being radicalized by really, really bad governments that essentially can look at it from the perspective of we can make money on this. There's always money in war, right? So I'd like to mention that because I think it's important to understand that, you know, I come from a country, Albania, which also had Kosovo as part of it, and then we were split in 1913. And Serbia does not recognize the independence of Kosovo. And so it's very much a scenario of Serbia did commit atrocities in Kosovo that were unthinkable. And Kosovo, to protect themselves, they had freedom fighters that formed an alliance to protect their own country, right? Now, in some eyes, those organizations are terrorist. Not in some eyes, in many eyes, right? And so there's always a perspective. Where we start disagreeing is when we commit atrocities towards innocent people that are not soldiers. They are not identifiable by a uniform, and they are simply war casualties, right? And that then they are targeted killings in order to create mass murder, in order to stay relevant in the way you are creating impact. And that's by creating as much terror as you possibly can, first for attention of the world, and second, because money is in play. So a lot of it might not have to do with principles. It might have to do with money. It might have to do with certain interests of certain countries that have nothing to do with what we're fighting for here. And that's the disappointing part about this conflict, is that at this point it's gotten hijacked by all kinds of groups that claim and proclaim to be protecting freedoms and to be protecting the Palestinian people. And it's really tough. When you say, what are we to do as Americans, I think first and foremost, for me, God comes in front of everything. So we must pray. I think that's one of the most important things, and it's the one that works. The second part is to clearly understand the conflict, right? It's easy to read the news and to say, oh, yep, this group's a bad guy, this group's the good guy, and that's how we deal, right? But looking at the facts are these, that when October 7th came around, if you were to look back at how Palestinians and Israelis were working together. They did have a working relationship. So Palestinians had passports. They had the ability to serve in government positions in Israel. So they had rights, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's the settlements and all that, and those are all real things. But there was an advancement of rights that basically came to a halt, and now it's gone back at least 100 years, I feel like, if you look back. So that's why I always go back to diplomacy, because I think when the diplomatic dialogue ceases is when we have the most to lose, right? Bringing back to the table and having them agree to a ceasefire is what we should be putting pressure on our government to do. And I've been following it, and I know President Trump is working really, really hard on a ceasefire, and it's a lot tougher than one might think. At this point, the conflict has gone way longer than it should have, and probably it's going to be really tough to get to a ceasefire. But I think it will happen eventually because the people will demand it. So,
just a little tidbit. So I'm looking on the internet again. The Covenant of the Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas, only came into existence in 1988.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, that's when the bombing was happening. So they emerged as freedom fighters, people protecting innocent people from bombings.
Right. So it was in 1987, the 20 years after the 6-Day War, which was the first intifada, if I'm saying that right, began as a resistance of the Israeli occupation of Gaza. There's so many pieces to this puzzle. So you had, in 79, you have the Ayatollah taking over in Iran. And then you have Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait, which that threw off talks between Israel, Saudi Arabia. It just threw the whole region. And then, of course, the U.S. gets involved again. Do you think that the media has played a big part in all this?
The media has all the power, right? Because the best way to get to the people is the media. To manipulate public opinion is the media. And so, yes, I believe so. I think the media of today is probably not the same media that was reporting back then.
Oh, yeah,
right?
For sure.
So I think that's a really big part. I believe that fundamentally, the inability to have strong diplomacy when it comes to both the Palestinian representation and the Israeli representation, it's what's hurt us the most. And that includes the inability of the United Nations to play the role that they were created to play, which was a peacemaking role. I remember when I would go as part of my studies at the UN, we heard a lot about the settlements, right? And so they were resolutions that they were being passed. When you really look at a resolution, it means nothing. It just means that Lisa agrees with me on this is bad.
Right.
And so I think once we kind of made the United Nations almost like I'm trying to think of the best word to use here without offending international organizations, it just became irrelevant. And in the moment that it became irrelevant, their fundamental role of keeping peace by diplomacy created a huge gap on who else is supposed to do it, right? And so that's kind of, I think, yes, the media is important. Of course, it's played a role, but I think all the international organizations, not just the United Nations, have failed the people of Palestine and Israel in fulfilling their obligations and what they are funded to do, which is to engage in peacemaking exercises in those regions. So
Abdullah, you're being awfully quiet. What's your take on all this?
So I can talk about things that are affecting Pakistan,
Please.
on these wars. So Pakistan has always been an ally of U.S. whether it comes to the war in Afghanistan or the war in the Middle Eastern countries. Right now, things that were going on with Iran. President Trump called upon, invitation to the army chief of Pakistan into the Oval Office and had a lunch with him, and they had really important discussion 2 days before U.S. attacked Iran. So I think that Pakistan has always supported U.S.
Mm-hmm.
and Pakistan did face backlash for that, whether it comes to when a lot of terrorist attacks in Pakistan by Afghani troops and Taliban's. They think that they think of Pakistan as an enemy because Pakistan supported U.S. So a lot of suicidal bombings. And while I was in school, I remember that there was a point then at a time that we had to go to school with transparent bags because they would put bombs in kids' bags and bomb the schools and mosques. So imagine how terrorized a kid would be with, their bags would be constantly checked, and any kid, would have a bomb in their bag and they wouldn't even know. Or there were bombs placed outside schools and outside mosques and shopping centers and stuff like that. And I remember as a kid, our parents used to tell us that our siblings, not all of us, to go together to any event or shopping mall or because anything could happen, and they didn't want the whole family just to vanish like that.
I cannot imagine what it would have been like to live like that. That constant fear of knowing, gosh, I could go to school today and not come home.
Mm-hmm.
That's just horrible. One thing that really I was thinking about, Besa, and you said this, and that I think is our responsibility to educate ourselves and understand that it is not simply because of a religious issue, religious differences. It's not simply political differences. It could be greed. Like people talk about here in the United States, war profiteers. So it's not a simple, we hear here in the United States since October 7th, there's been a huge display of people supporting the Palestinians. And yes, from what I hear, the Gaza Strip is uninhabitable, largely because Hamas won't let things get through. We've seen videos of them taking over the aid trucks that have been sent in to help the people of Hamas. There's no simple explanation. There's a lot of different pieces to this puzzle, but I appreciate both of you being here and helping enlighten us a little bit and understand a little bit more. There's really no one right side, no one wrong side in this. Everybody's different. I also do like the fact you mentioned about how Israel's targets when they do bomb are very purposeful, very intentional military targets, whereas Iran's targets, whoever. They don't care who they hurt. They'll bomb hospitals.
I think it has something to do with the technology for Iran.
You think?
I think so, because there's multiple different, coming from a veteran, there's multiple different types of weapons, and it's possible that the reason why they're so indiscriminate is because they don't know how to target. They can't target.
Well, in Israel, you have the Mossad. Oh my gosh, what they did using pagers as bombs.
Yeah.
They've got people helping on the inside. Maybe Iran doesn't have people on the inside. I don't know.
Mossad's at a different level than those other guys. They're famous for their technology, their ability, their skills, everything else. So that it kind of makes sense to me why. And I've been in conflict. There's you kind of think to the other side, gosh, what, you guys don't know how to aim? that comes up like, well, you guys can't aim? Yeah.
Interesting.
I when I was in Geneva, we talk a lot about targeted killings. What a targeted killing is. It's what Mike just spoke about, right? Is precision killing. So that's my target right there. I hit that target and I go home. And those are done with unmanned air vehicles, drones.
Right.
Right. The availability of that kind of technology, it's out there. Is it affordable or not by a government like Iran that I don't know? But I do know something in terms of war. I don't want to say principle. It's not principle, but war is supposed to be, according to the Geneva Convention, which Israel is part of, has signed. Only with uniformed people can you engage in war activities, right? Otherwise, you go into war crimes, and those are punishable by international law. And so, of course, Iran doesn't care about international law and all these things. So a couple of times you might have seen, one of them is Amal Clooney. She's a human rights lawyer, right? So she actually said that Israel is committing atrocities against the people of Palestine, and here's proof, et cetera, et cetera. Then the prime minister of Palestine came back to the UN and said, well, wait a minute, because here is all the atrocities that we have committed unintentionally, and here is what Hamas is doing intentionally, right? And so you look at that and you just kind of compare things and you think, okay, well, wait a minute, what is happening is directed at a certain group, is not, or a certain person. So in her case, for example, she wanted the prime minister of Israel to be detained by implementing international law because of war crimes. And so all that evidence goes into play in the United Nations and The Hague, and obviously there's international law that goes into play. Is that implementable? No, not really. I be truthful with you. International law does exist. It is practically impossible to enforce.
Yeah.
Well, that would make sense because, how can you have international law be effective when you don't have a supreme international leader with the supreme international military?
The Hague is such entity, and if the Hague is good at documenting, it does have the ability and the authority to arrest and detain you. That's happened in the conflict between Serbia and Kosovo. They detained both Serbians. So Milosevic was in The Hague in a prison, and that's how he died, et cetera, et cetera. But, and there is people, these freedom fighters that I mentioned earlier, also were detained for crimes that they had committed during the conflict, right? And so if the evidence is there, you get punished. The evidence was not there for those people. And it was shown through evidence that those people were acting in self-defense, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about, is like, who is the aggressor? That is the tough answer at this moment. October 7th, we saw an aggressor, right? So that is very simple to go back to October 7th. But what led to October 7th could also be an act of self-defense.
That's
right?
what I was going to say. Many people that I've spoken to who are supporting the Palestinian side of things say October 7th happened because that was their self-defense mechanism, that they are being attacked by Israel, that Israel keeps moving into the areas where they said they would never go, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, again, it's very convoluted.
It is.
And
So that's why it is so hard to enforce international law, is because documenting who the aggressor is at which time is very hard. Now, of course, the people that we were caught on camera hurting innocent concert goers, that's very easy, right? Those people are not attacking anybody.
right.
There is a crime being committed. We see you, you're here, you're going to prison, right? Or you're, this is your end of life, etc. But past that point, when we go to the government level of leaders that have issued orders to attack innocent people and all that, that's very hard. In the case of Milosevic, which I think it's a great example of case law for international law. He had documented orders of mass graves of people that had done nothing wrong, that were in their homes, right? So that is easy to document. Therefore, he died in prison and all that. So
a lot of people, the memory of the Serbia-Kosovo war, summarize what happened afterwards.
It's very similar in a lot of ways. So in 1913, what used to be the Great Albania, right, included Kosovo, Northern Macedonia, parts of Montenegro, and parts of Greece. Or rather, they were parts of Albania, and they were given to these countries, right? So we chopped up a country and made a whole new country. When we chopped up pieces, one of those pieces was Kosovo of today. It was basically Albania. It would be like taking the state of Rhode Island, or what other state is closer to another nation, help me, to Canada or whatever.
Well, there's all kinds of border states, you mean?
Yeah.
All like Maine, or
Yeah.
even Ohio's a border state.
Yeah, so giving Ohio to a whole other country, or like the state of Michigan to Canada, let's say, right? It's a terrible example. Oh my God, I'm going to get killed in the comments for this, but do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And now saying Michigan is Canadian, right? After having existed for 6,000 years, all of a sudden it's very similar to the Ukraine case as well, Ukrainian case. So Serbia took the now new Kosovo, and they said, you're now ours. Kosovo never accepted that position. They were never okay with it. And so they fought back, and they said, no, we're at worst, we're our own country, but we really are part of Albania, right? So we speak the same language, same traditions, everything. We're the same people. And so Kosovo never recognized the independence. Serbia never recognized the independence of Kosovo. And in 1999, there was a really big conflict, similar to what happened with Palestine and Israel. And, thousands of people died. Hundreds and thousands of people died, wounded, maimed. 20,000 women were raped and killed. Because, again, rape is a war crime, is a way to subdue the enemy, right? And so it's great case law because eventually NATO intervened, right? And the conflict ended because NATO put all the force that they had in ending the conflict. And then the prime minister at the time, or president, was Milosevic, and he was detained by The Hague, and they had enough evidence to say, you are being detained for war crimes. And so he was sentenced, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a really good way of being able to enforce international law between the conflict starting and him being detained, and then he passed away. It's about 12 years,
March of 2006.
yeah, from, because the conflict, the big eruption was in 1999, but the conflict had been going on for years and years and years.
So I'm curious, why did they break up Albania to begin with?
Okay, Albania was a very large country in Europe, and the Europeans did not want such a large country in the heart of Europe. And it's also a very old country with very old traditions. And so they did not want such a large place, such large land, minerals. We're a very rich country in petroleum, copper. You know where I'm going with this, right?
Sounds like greed.
Yeah.
Sounds like
So
greed was the motivator.
Kosovo, the region, that area, Kosovo itself, is very rich in gold, again, natural gas, all the minerals you can think of. And so this was their way of, grabbing wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing with Albania is also it has the ability to go in the Adriatic and Ionian Sea,
Mm-hmm.
which Serbia does not have that ability because it's landlocked. And so this was their way of gaining access to the ports.
Wow.
Yeah. So a lot there. I mean, obviously, it's all about interest. It's like every other war that's ever happened is you initiate a war to gain access to the country's wealth,
Mm-hmm.
and you use a particular reason that will hype up all the people, and that's how that worked. So,
Well, since you're from Albania, share with us, what's Albania like today?
oh, well, today it's beautiful. The Albania that is remaining, right? It's in the Western Balkans, of course, so is Kosovo. And it's grown. I mean, we also had communism for 45 years from the point I just spoke about after World War II. Today, we call it a transitional democracy. Basically, it means that it's just not consolidated in the way it should be, in the way of human rights and the ability to have a free and safe election. So those are still concerns in Albania. Kosovo has a far more consolidated government, and that's all due to the United States because the oversight has remained there. And we always say, Albania and Kosovo, always the sun rises to the west for us because we are so Western leaning and that. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been very enlightening.
Indeed, it has. Yes.
I highly recommend our listeners to do your research. Don't just believe what you hear on the media. This is a very convoluted mess. And it would behoove all of us as American citizens to learn the history of that and how it can affect us. Thank you, Abdullah and Besa, for being here.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much
you
for having us.
Absolutely.
We'll definitely have you back again
yeah.
to talk about your campaign.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Coming up November, so that'll be good. This has been Straight Shot Politics.